let's talk about Through Ultan's Door and associated products from Ben Laurence and one adventure from Gus L, as well as, there's art and cartography from him as well. This makes up the published version of the Wishery setting, which Ben has been publishing and talking about on his blog Miserian's Garden for many years. And there are, so far, this is a zine at this point, so far there are 3 full issues, issue 1, issue 2, and the double issue 3, which was kickstarted. With the Kickstarter, there are also a couple of pamphlets, which we'll talk about as we get there, and the adventure, I think separately available by Gus L, Beneath the Moss Courts, which connects to issue 3, in terms of it is an expansion of a location in issue 3. There is other material online, and I will sometimes touch on that, but this is obviously mostly going to be a review of what you can get your hands on once they're republished, reprinted. I think they're all available as PDFs on Drive-Thru, if people are that worried about it. I'm going to be reviewing these zines, but I'm going to review them in a peculiar format, different to how I did the short adventures of the Marlinko Canton stuff, the Slumbering Ursine June stuff by Chris Kutelik, where I did each book. Here, because zines are an unusual format, I'm going to be treating this as if this were one book. Call it Cyan Between Volume 1 or something like that. You know, the first book in a series of books about this setting, Wishery. And so I'm going to be flitting between issues because there's a thematic order to the issues that I think if you're going to end up buying this, you're going to end up probably buying all of it, particularly if you're buying in PDF. And so knowing what is there and what you can make of this as a game is, I think, more useful than just going through issue by issue. I will try to say which issue something is from, though. I should say this does raise like a wider, interesting issue about zines. I love zines, so this is not about to be an anti-zine comment, but it is a statement about how zines work at the table as things that we actually use in play. The advantages of zines, other than the aesthetic side and the degree to which it's kind of an interesting way of creating material, like what would go in one issue of a zine, like a 28 or 40 page book, in kind of digest formats, that size. So not a big double wide style TSR module, but digest size. How do you format that? How do you make that really useful? I think that's a good question, and I think there are various. Here's another one. Wormskin, the predecessor to the Dolmenwood campaign book, which will come out, well, when it's Kickstarter, but you can currently get on Patreon. There are therefore kind of interesting challenges that in some ways do impact on gameplay, but the real thing that's an advantage in that format is that it allows a creator to put out material in small chunks without having to write a whole book, without having to put all the risks into that, and they can make their small chunk really good and kind of sell that and say, this is what I've got to offer. I've got one dungeon, one set of house rules, and some spells, or something like that. And that's a very legitimate thing to do. And it's a really enjoyable thing as a reader to process, like, oh, what's going to come next? Oh, I really liked adding that bit. There is a way in which there is a non-gameplay element that is nice. And because there's an attempt to make them really useful at the table, I should say, I'm not going to bother addressing this much later, these are on the whole incredibly usable at the table, better than many zines, in fact. The downside, though, is that you end up getting quite partial settings that some people will say, oh, well, you can just add the stuff, you draw implications, you get material from elsewhere, just mash it up, take the inspiration, and I get that. The downside of that is that as I'm spending money on a setting, I'm kind of allowed to want the setting. It's not up to the author, it's not the author's job to give me everything I want, but I'm allowed to want that. And so the zine format sometimes risks that, I think, that you end up saying, oh, I've got like 2 issues of this new zine, and it's kind of cool, but I don't actually know how anything links together, and I'm going to add to it, but I kind of want them to put out the next issue so I can use their much better version than mine. That's why I'm paying them. And yeah, there is a tension there that means that here, if you only buy issue 1, you'll get some really cool stuff. But if you're thinking, oh, I want this to be, maybe this could turn into something else, you really want to start getting the other information in. And then you're going to have to flip between issues or whatever format you're using. So yeah, that is a reflection on zines. It's not a criticism of them, I like them, but certainly it's part of what forces me to review this in an unusual manner, because really, this is such a brilliant campaign setting. that you're going to want to look at it more, and you're going to want to think about it in terms of not just an idea that you might steal ideas to, but you're going to think of it in terms of a campaign setting that you could use. Wishery is the land of dreams. Essentially, it's a Lovecraftian land of dreams. There are sentient cats. Really, though, the emphasis is on this one place, Zion, a moat in the sky of Wishery, which has Zion above, which is a city, Zion below, a hanging jungle, a vertical jungle going down, so you climb down to the treetops, as it were, and Zion between. And the way Ben put this in one blog article was that this was the three classic forms of the adventure, of the D&D adventure and campaign setting. So the city crawl, the dungeons in the middle, and the wilderness crawl at the bottom, and the wilderness crawl is a hex crawl fundamentally. And I think that's an interesting one. It's a brilliant conceit, everything's in one place, but it's also something which sort of feeds into the psychedelic and dreamlike nature of things, both from Lovecraft and from other sources. The idea that this is just this weird floating rock which has this baroque, decaying, strange city on top, and this bizarre jungle below, and then a weird and dark middle of dungeon environments, but which are all, and here one of the major routes through it is a sewer river. This very much on the grimmer side of that vision of the dungeon. Ben's writing in this is, and his vision of it, and I recommend the blog to you in terms of just brilliant articles about it. I don't think he's deleted much. I don't know if maybe one or two articles have gone missing that I used to remember being there, probably because they're being polished up to be zines. I don't know, or maybe nothing has, but most of it's still there, and just the descriptions of stuff, the way in which he's seen the campaign, the writing about what's happened in the campaign is beautiful, and his writing generally is just very very good. Here, this is just a random section from the Catacombs of the Fleisch Guild in issue 2, introduced like this: in the porcelain abattoirs of Zion above, the sacred butchers, supernal exsanguinators, and exalted flayers of the Fleisch Guild labour tirelessly at their exacting arts, offering sacrifices to appease the insatiable hunger of the unrelenting archons. Their holiest guild sites in the Undercity are marked by ornate chum spouts that stream effluvia from their grisly rites. On the great sewer river, these spouts adorn the entrance to the catacombs, interring master carvers along with their child prodigies. All praise be to Malprion, aspect of Vulgatis, archon of unseemly and fecund growth. That he is very good at capturing tone, and at the sort of, I don't know whether you want to call it as baroque or decadent in a Yellow Book decadent sense, style, but this ornate and circumlocutive style of description, and of that. I mean, it helps you envision a world which is itself baroque, ornate, decadent, and I think massively adds to it. And again, throughout, you'll hear some more examples of this as I read through. But his writing is very good and never over long, really. That's one risk of ornate description, is it ends up being far too long. And here, generally speaking, I don't find there to be a risk of it being particularly long. I think it is, generally speaking, terse and easy to find. And the layout is, as I've already suggested, basically fine. I mean, as an example, I won't get this up in the PDFs, but just you can see, pretty easy single column, generally one or two rooms on a page, and pretty clear about how it's going to work. The art is, a lot of the art is by Huago Ilustrador, like this front cover of issue 1, which is beautiful, isn't it? Look at these guys. They're in the jungle, I guess. They're riding a slug. It looks very oniric and dreamlike, doesn't it? And other art is by Gus L, and Gus is a great illustrator. The maps are, generally speaking, by Gus, and let's see if I've got a map at the end here, or if there is a map. Yeah, so this is a map by Gus of the Inquisitor's Theatre. Generally speaking, I like Gus's map art. It is pretty clear. Sometimes, and I might see an example as we go, but just sometimes I'm not quite sure what a piece of notation means. Like, this is not stairs, I don't think, if I remember correctly, but it looks like stairs. There are a couple of things where the hand-drawn style, which very much fits the zine format, it does maybe come a cropper with tiny bits of detail. The other thing is, I don't think, maybe I'm missing some obvious trick, because I've looked at all these maps and I've used some of them in at the table. But I find it an issue that there isn't any clear scale, that sometimes you are able to work out roughly what's going on, but rooms aren't scaled and the map isn't scaled. And it means that if you are, generally speaking, if you're trying to use movement rates, you kind of have to somewhat work out, like, oh, this is a big theatre. I guess that must mean this is maybe this stage is 30 or 40 feet long or something. You can make stuff up, but it's just a small thing. But look, in general, these are lovely maps, mostly clear, virtually always clear, I should say. And the aesthetic certainly helps. This is one thing where we can complain about usability, and I'm saying, these things are less usable. But what I'd want to say in praise of aesthetically rich styles, when they are balanced with usability, is that if they help you as the DM envision the location, then there's a cost benefit that maybe is working in your favour. You don't need to be too upset about the fact it's not 10 out of 10 usable, it's only 9 out of 10 usable. You get my point anyway. So let's talk about, we're going to start by talking about ways to get to Wishery. So this is kind of what I mean. I'm not going to just say, oh, let's look at SU1. I'm going to say, how do people get to Wishery? Because it is the Dreamlands, isn't it? So we have here an introduction to something. And Ultan's Door it's called Through Ultan's Door. Ultan's Door, which I think is how Ben started his first campaign. I'm pretty certain it was, is a door in the cellar of a shop in the city that your characters are in, and this is essentially something where this can be dropped anywhere. I actually dropped the door not in Ultan's shop but in a cave, and it opens into a place in the Inquisitor's Theatre, and it just lets you get into Wishery, and it's just there. And here you have Ultan is charging money for it, and there are rumours you might get, there are reasons you might get, so classic campaign starters, and a quick description of Ultan's shop, both what he owns, so you can steal stuff, it is a location, what he owns, what the stats for him and his nephew, and what he's charging to get through. And it's fairly vestigial. I don't mean that as an insult, but it's very much most of the time, if you're starting it, you might well be setting it up by saying, if it's a one-shot or you're using it as a very quick campaign start, you're just going to say, you go to Ultan's shop, you're interested, you want to go through the door, you pay your money, and you do that all off screen essentially, and then is there anything else you need to do before you go through the door? You keep it very simple. So it doesn't need to be more than that, but it is very much the quick start that is, I think, meant to just let you get on with things. And yeah, it's fine. That is what I used in my Wishery game, though it was dropped in, it was a trapdoor in another campaign. Then we have the second way of doing these things is the opium dreamers. So essentially, people through drug use end up in Wishery, not because they're asleep, they're not slumbering, but they are catatonic with the trip. And so this is a sample table of how basically you go somewhere, but then there might be an effect, might be neutral, might be good, might be bad, and that is, again, that's fun. It's interesting mechanically. It's silly, and I mean that in the sense that not that it's silly in literary terms. It's very much a rich literary trope, but because of course what you're saying is, roll a die, pay your money, takes your chance, just see what happens. And that's very OSR, isn't it? But it's something which may not suit everyone as much because it is a sort of punctuated probability way of screwing a player or buffing a player before the session starts. Once they're in the Dreamlands, they can stay there as long as they like. It's a way partly, and this is mentioned here, it's partly one of those ways where you can have a character not be around. They're not on a trip this adventure. In the other house rules for Slumberland section, there's a similar thing about, this is an issue 2, sorry. I think issue 2, yeah. About, just people no one even knows someone exists if they're not there, so you don't ever have to worry about continuity. That's a suggested one. Or if a player's not there, they're not there, the character isn't there because they're not dreaming of being there. And I think that's interesting and allows for a drop-in session style, and I think that's the first big Zion campaign. I think it had 18 players after 2 years. It was very much there were regular players and there are more occasional players. It was an open table. And I think that works fine. And so Opium Dreamers and Ultan's Door both allow a degree of low investment play, and there's some mechanically interesting things in there. The other one, which I think is what Ben was saying about he's starting his own, basically based on Old School Essentials campaign using, is Elspeth's Letter. This is, there's not even a print version of this, I don't think. Certainly I did not get it off Kickstarter. This is a way of starting a campaign in Wishery that is much more in detail. And it is, on that basis, worth talking about a little more. It's funny, isn't it? Because it's just a random side product, but it's also the most detailed way to start a campaign. It's a 19-page, excluding cover, 19-page campaign starter in digest form. So, he describes here how there are many roads from the Waking World to Zion, not just the door, and this is a different one. So basically, Elspeth is a PC's godmother, and she has died, and they haven't been in touch for a long time. She used to tell him stories, or her stories, of Wishery and of Zion, and that was more or less why she was kicked out. This is in a fantasy world, it should be said, because that's the base assumption of some of the events in Elspeth's house. But she dies and she leaves everything to her godchild, and it's as a product, Elspeth's Letter, I should say, if we're talking about product quality, it lacks a map. It's formatted very simply, but it's fine. You don't need either of those things, really. You don't need the extra formatting. You don't need a map for this particular thing. It's really lovely beyond that. Do you know what this, not so much Wishery as a whole, but what this reminds me of is locations in games by Jonas Karatzis, the Lands of Dream games, which I wonder if Ben's played. I don't know. I'd love to hear from him if he has. But things like Desert Bridge or The Sea Will Claim Everything, which are wonderful games, enormously underappreciated point-and-click adventure games with incredible art and lovely music and wonderful themes, which I highly recommend. But there's something here about the kind of sweetly dreamlike way in which Elspeth's house is this location in not a mundane world, but in a semi-mundane world, which suddenly opens up all these weird things. There should be her executor, who is an intelligent cat of Zion. He's not there, because though he's kind of weirdly, erratically, irrationally for a cat loyal to her desires, he's still a cat of Zion, and, the dead are dead. You don't make deals with the dead. But yeah, so this guy, Mr. Scamper is his name, I think, he is not there. But you have all these hints of this cat who must live there. You have a bound air spirit who is a bit like is a halfway between a bound genie and a bound demon, and has all the sense of that. And there's secrets that you might find, and there's things you're meant to work out as you go through. So Elspeth's house is itself a location. So you go there, you find out that she had a way into Zion, one of the alternative ways, which is a potion. But there's also extra mysteries. Some of the locations she said that you might be able to go to aren't there. They're memory files that you drink, and you know where they are, and so you know that you can use the potion to go there. They're not there, and they've been taken by the cat, in fact. And so you've got all this interesting way in, this way back, but then it's a limited thing because there's only so many potions. So maybe you need to produce some more. Maybe you need to find something else. That's one thing. Is the Opium Dreamer and the Ultan's Door methods don't integrate. Well, not so much the Ultan's Door method, but the Opium Dreamer method doesn't really integrate on a campaign level except for a drop-in player, because there's an expectation that you're using this as a downtime base. This is a place you go, and there are some notes on after this many downtimes, this kind of thing might happen. Rather, it's that you roll on an event table after every downtime. So there is an assumption this is your domain, essentially, outside of Wishery. It is... as I say, there's puzzles, there's hints of other locales you don't have the right key for, and I'll talk a bit about that when we talk about stuff that isn't published properly yet. There are some links to the wider fantasy world that you're in, the Prime, as it were. Like there is a rival party who wants to come and find out about what's happening in Elspeth's house. And there is a big link into the actions of the cats of Wishery in their war against the humans who oppress them. Basically, the cats of Wishery are sentient, they don't like humans on the whole. And so Mr. Scamper has taken the stuff so that he can help the cats of Zion in their war against the humans. And though it seems like maybe it's going too far, maybe Horatio Yowl is taking it too far. And so you've got a whole plot line there. And that's an enormous product, by the way, for 20 pages. I'm enormously impressed by Elspeth's letter. One of my favourite things, in a way, actually, in it. Not necessarily the most useful thing for just playing a game, but as this superstructure, as a micro Nightwolf Inn, if you like. It's a really good example of that. So I like that. So those are your ways into Wishery, your ways of starting a campaign. As I say, there are some rules in issue 2 about running loose open table games, basically about drop in, drop out. They're not necessarily vital for everyday games, every campaign that is just normal. There are some miscellaneous points. There are some maladies in issue 3, and in a separate pamphlet. There is the pamphlet. These are dreamlike maladies. So, for instance, let's have a look at it. Mnemonic distemper. Spreads by visiting family tombs or lingering in clan libraries. You get a +4 to the save against it every 12 weeks or 6 downtimes. The tiresome obsession with the minutiae of the history of one's clan begins innocently with a love of the stories shared by elders in family history. And he has a disease advanced mechanic, which I won't find on screen because it's not particularly important. But yeah, it's a nice mechanic, I should say. These are quite important in issue 3 in one sense, in that the pseudo settlement or the quasi settlement you get there, or one of them, is a sanatorium where people have diseases. You might catch them; they have particular effects on those particular NPCs who have them, and so it makes sense that there are some details of it. And then the pamphlet was just, here's more, and obviously more Ben had come up with that aren't directly related to the characters in the sanatorium. I really like the mechanic. I really like the flavour. It is useful in the sanatorium of the benefactors. It's an interesting extra danger. I'm not against the idea of diseases and curses and stuff being additional dangers in the world that don't just happen because of a trap, but are generally part of how you experience the world. I like it. It's nice to have it, but part of me did kind of think, oh man, it's a bonus pamphlet. I just want another location. Now, I think there's arguments against that. I can see why some people love having more maladies, but I definitely felt like it's garnish, not meat, maybe was how I felt. There's also a mention in issue 1 of how champions of the Archons work. If I can find that. Yeah, so basically the Archons are these weird alien gods, again, sort of Lovecraftian at some level. But the particular point is you can accept the gift of the Weaver of Shadows, who is a being near the Inquisitor's Theatre, and it pierces the chest of the recipient and injects black ichor into you. And then you know through the whispers of the shadow that you're now a pawn of Asmorain, well, if you accept the gift. Asmorain, in the numinous game, the inscrutable contest between the unrelenting Archons, sole deities of the alien religion of Zion above. You get instructions, you get abilities. There's separately, this is not the same thing as being a champion, but you can become a cleric of these Archons and get specific spells that are unique to that Archon or god. And yeah, that's nice. I think maybe this shows how I envision things. Maybe this is just a style thing, but I immediately think, yes, I'm happy to have a couple of pages of that, more than I am of having a couple of pages of extra maladies. They're both good, no complaints, both perfectly usable, clear enough mechanics. There is and this is a pretty significant point, let's switch screen, there is a sewer point crawl. That is after you're in Ultan's door, or however you got there, there is a sewer point crawl. I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with it being on its side, because that's how the PDF displays it. I will put up. This is Gus's. It's isometric, as you can see. You've got the sewer at the top spilling out into a bore, and then that is various paths of the sewer river down to the great falls in the White Jungle at the bottom, or that lead to the White Jungle at the bottom. So this is, there are rules for this, and I'll probably touch on those in a minute, I think. But the general idea of procedure is that you go there, you check encounters between points. You can try to find hidden locations. There's a small number of hidden locations between points. And then the marked points, so for instance you have the Sanitarium of the Benefactors, the Inquisitor's Theatre, Temple of the Archons, the Churning Gate, etc. These are places you can go, and which I guess they are not hidden. They're places you'll see as you travel down. Even if the players aren't told straight up, this is there. They'll see it on their way. The hidden points are places they are searching between nodes. It's randomized. It's a nice idea, the idea that minor locales are discoverable and randomized, because it means that they interact with the environments differently. When the crane may, or Kefaya the sewer dragon, is in a different place to the last time, and I know most of us are only going to run one game here, but it means that the randomized placement sets up different possible interactions with the locations, and in some cases, the factions at those locations who are interested in the wider sewer. So yeah, I liked that a lot. I think it's a pretty small danger or risk, I suppose, of, you're adding a couple of minutes on randomizing. You're not risking much by it being in a different place. That is Kefaya the sewer dragon, which is a pretty cool picture. We also have, we have the crane may, who was a spirit of the wind of some kind, who was exiled to the sewer river with her stink cranes. So obviously, like a swan may, there's this quite wonderful, beautiful thing going on, but then you think, no, it's corrupted, has become literally scatological, and so yeah, and they are the two major minor discoverable locales, major minor. Like, I think one is a goods cache, for instance, and of the minor discoverables, there are what is there? There is a channel to Zion above that terminates in Osman Keys. That's useful. By the Candy Works. There's a shortcut. There's stashed goods. There's Fen of the Crane May. There's the Verdant Purveyor, which is its own adventure beneath the Moss Courts. If you don't only have this, it gives you enough information to run it, but beneath the Moss Courts, I'd highly recommend. We'll get there, but I'd highly recommend to use that. And the Lair of Kefaya. So Kefaya and the Swan May are... Kefaya is a oracle who gives sewer-themed oracular insight. The Crane May is just a kind of the factional matriarch of of the Stink Cranes. And they are rivals because Kefaya has the Crane May's mask, magical mask. And they can both help you. Neither is antagonistic automatically. Kefaya is more dangerous up front and may lose her temper quicker, I think. But basically, they're both fine in terms of, if you play it right, you could make allies, but they don't work well together. And it may be useful to help the Crane. The Crane May will become much more useful if you help her against Kefaya. And yeah, that's just a fun bit of interaction with really pungent NPCs. Really interesting, different kinds of monsters to deal with. And that's one thing, is that because Ben is nearly always creating new monsters and in a massively new set of locales, he's not just spinning, and I think so he's neither just replicating, nor is he doing the very good thing where you spin stuff, you respin the old. He is, generally speaking, putting new ideas in there and expanding the canon. It does mean occasionally you might be like, that's not to my taste, I didn't really like this new idea. But it's certainly a valuable work separate from... Just reading these is going to inspire you, is what I'm saying, even if you're not running the game. And the major locales I'll discuss later, I think. Well, I will, as we go. Here, it takes 2 turns of travel to go between points, 3 turns to go upriver, so different speeds for upstairs, downstairs. And you then check... There is a lay of the land table, which is a locale table for the encounter. It's a D12, and in a way, you could justify much more than that. But this is something I've certainly seen, and I sometimes use, I often use, is to have a locale or a weather or whatever else it is. I think for sea locations, for instance, I have a D12 table, which is kind of sea, locale, and weather, just to kind of quickly randomize it. And it just helps in terms of setting the scene for an encounter is a lot easier when you know the terrain. I know that some books would also have, or instead have, a mood or event, like what are they doing when you find this encounter. But yeah, no, it's very successful. That is in issue 3 part 1, and is basically, it's integral if you're going to run a sewer river campaign, if you're going to run it as well as it could be, because otherwise you've just got the nodes. And I think because issue 3 has so much about the sewer river, the fact that it also has a very useful, functional, easy to use point crawl, it's not complicated. It doesn't end up saying, okay, well, you've got to do this and this and this. It just says roll for an encounter, it takes this long. It also does link above and below. It has both the locations, which you can go up from, and it has the connection to Osman Key, and it goes below at the Great Falls. So it gives you connections to the whole of Zion. The settlements, there are... Okay, so the big settlement is obviously Zion above as a whole, the city. And there are some connections there, which I'll talk about. There are settlements in Zion below, of course. There are civilized peoples. There are a couple of unique ancestries, mole rats and like a bird people thing that are on Ben's site still, for instance. But there are 2 quasi-settlements. By that I mean places you might be able to stay and interact with people usefully in the Sewer River. The first is the sanatorium, and the second is the harbour, both of which I think are detailed in issue 3, part 2, which is the points of interest really on the Sewer River that aren't already mentioned as a minor location. These are major locations. They're actually not necessarily much longer than the minor locations. The sanitarium is much the bigger of the 2 of these locations. It's not a dungeon, but rather a settlement where characters might find temporary respite and crucial information, or be drawn into factional conflicts. Although not an adventuring site, it has the potential to transform the campaign, is how Ben describes it. And basically the sanitarium is a underground, like a in the Zion between area hospital for those who have these magical ailments, run by the sanitarium, but run by the Guild of Benefactors, who basically do religious good works, but only at a severe cost to themselves to appear pious. They're not nice people. They're actually quite weird, controlling people. And there are factions within the sanitarium. There are the trustees and everyone else. And so if the benefactors are there, there's a very different environment if they're not there. And you can exploit those factional conflicts to gain power or influence. It is an interesting thing that though it is an amoral, in the broad sense, setting, this is definitely... There are many times, but particularly here, where half your players, whatever their character is like, are going to end up being like, maybe even more than half, we should help these people. You're going to get drawn in because the suffering masses in their hovels being given just enough to get by, but really in this obviously ridiculous and quasi pseudo-Victorian, maybe rather than quasi pseudo-Victorian, parodic of Victorian workhouse style thing. I think it's good. It's something. It doesn't have the normal purpose of a settlement in terms of... It has encounters, I should say, so it has an encounter list. It does not have the ordinary function of a settlement in terms of giving it like a rumour table or obvious quest threads. Those, I think, there are rumour tables in different places. And also, to a degree, once the characters are going, they are deciding what they're doing, they're finding new locations, they're deciding what they want to do there. And so the few threads you might get out of these minor locations are bonuses. But it does mean that as a settlement, it is not. Its services are very limited. It doesn't function as a rumour hub. It is rather a place you can rest and get food and maybe play around with the factions to see in maybe a Yojimbo style, or maybe in a Hero of Canton style uprising, something like that. Of course, screwing around with guilds has its downsides, let's say. The guilds of Zion above are very mighty. The harbour, which is in 3 part 2 as well, is much smaller and has much less detail. The sanitarium is detailed as a dungeon, as it were, as it's detailed as a full settlement map with full key, each being each key number being half a page or something, plus a factional guide. The harbour, on the other hand, is a couple of pages. It's a page and a half. As one approaches the falls on the great sewer river Zion, the currents quicken and waters rise. Soon lit lanterns line the walls, and a majestic harbour appears to one side in a cyclopean chamber of carved stone set behind breakers. The merchants that hang pagodas at the bottom of the great falls employ 24 mercenaries from the clan of the sons and daughters of the Vigilant Watcher under the terms of an antique contract to protect the harbour, to secure the pagodas from jungle assaults, and accompany merchant vessels sailing to and from Zion. And here, where the sanitarium is not particularly nice. The harbour, Captain Duodosma, he's decent. He serves out a romantic allegiance to the dying trade that once made his clan a household name. Because of the decay of Zion above, fundamentally due to the, and you can find this on the blog, due to the curse relating to the kingship, the hidden king of Zion, and the issues with the cats and everything else that's going on with Zion above. Zion between has decayed and become more dangerous, and the trade down the Sewer River has reduced. And so this is a decaying place. This is like a little bit like Darknon Station in that old excellent Platt's Starport guide for Star Wars. This decaying out of the way place, also affected now by sewer piracy and the dam of the lurid toads, which are both dungeon locations we'll get to. So this does give you a plot option, a rumour, 2,000 gold pieces for routing the lurid toads and breaking their dam, and 500 to 2,000 total, depending on what happens, for dealing with the pirates. And then that's how you get down. So and so it's a minor location. There is some opportunity for well, there are a bunch of signs and lots of shops, but only a few actually run. They're barracks, lanterns. You could probably get to stay there. You could probably have a drink there. You can get rumours and jobs there. But it's a minor settlement. It is a more friendly one, though. Except, of course, it's at the far end of the sewer. So if we're looking here, it's at the far end of the sewer. But it's here. That's the harbour. You can see the BOR there. So you've got to get through everything else. If you've started in the Inquisitor's Theatre, for instance, which is one location, the Elspeth's Letter, let's actually check that, because Elspeth's Letter gives us multiple locations for Zion between the theatre, so the Inquisitor's Theatre, the Catacombs, the Fleischer Guild, and the Sanitarium and the Benefactors. They're all much further upriver, so the same principle, I guess, applies. That to get to this quite nice place and to get to Zion below, you're going to have to make a lot more effort. And there is one other place, entry through to Zion below at the Inquisitor's Theatre, but it is also quite dangerous and unpleasant and difficult. The dungeons. This is where we'll go next, and this is, I guess, the remaining big section of discussion we're going to have. So the dungeons. There are, by my count, let's say, I think there are 5 dungeons, or 5 things that are usable as dungeons and intended to be used. The first, the smallest, I'll do very quickly. I do not have a PDF of. It is through Ultan's Door, the Knowing Bee. The Knowing Bee Sweet Forge, which is basically a defunct factory for sweets. The Zinese love sweets, which they made dream honey there and made things out of that. But now it's abandoned and infested by the bees. The white bees are still there, the dream bees. There is a gardener there who is he wants to protect the bees and the garden. There are honey ghouls, and then there is actually above a sunken garden in the neighbourhood of Gutter, abandoned to the bees. So there are 2 ways in. It is a 2-page dungeon essentially, or an 8 spread. You can see. So it'd be 8 pages in a PDF, but it's meant to be a double spread, isn't it? Really. And you can either enter from Zion above, or, and this is something here, you've got the entrance via the Sewer River at the bottom there. Well, in the middle there, you can kind of see there. So this is something I guess you'd put onto your random locations map, like the random minor locations. You'd say, okay, you're searching for a random minor location. You have found the Knowing Bee Sweet Forge. It is worth perhaps me checking how many nodes there are if you're going places between. So that's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so you need to potentially add on more nodes to make that work in terms of if you wanted to have space for all of the locations, the minor locations there are. It's essentially just one more though, so perhaps you have it replace a different one or be on the same node as a different one. I think the cache of goods is small enough. You could well decide that you don't want it to have its own dedicated node or sub-node. I think one thing I should say, by the way, about the Sewer River node crawl is that the monsters are again great. Iridescent slugs, mucus spinners, psychic barnacles, oneric pudding, stink cranes, sewer pirates, mould blooms, dream bubbles, with a randomised list there. The guildless, they're important elsewhere. Ascetics of Ilmara, a funeral barge, which basically, if you mess around with it, basically a Cthulhu comes and gets you. Echoes of Elsewhere, and a sewer worm eye, Kafire. So there's a lot of detail there as well. The actual crawl itself has not just locations but monsters. But anyway, the Knowing Bee Sweetforge, I enjoyed this. I enjoyed reading this. It has a main central section which is relatively open to exploration. Beyond that, it is pretty linear. It uses a system of gates and puzzles around knowing how to get different gates open, which is interesting. The map itself is pretty simple. It has a bit here, and then that goes down into one location, which if you can break through. From the bottom, you can break through one place into this bigger open location. You can then go right or left. It's very simple. It is, if you want remember the great critique of the one-page dungeon, and this is obviously pretty closely related, is that it reduces any possible scope and therefore can tend to gimmickry, i.e. you end up having a single idea and that's all you can afford, because even though you could technically have a bigger map, you can't afford the key. That's the big thing, is words for the key take up stuff. It's memorable, I should say. It's really enjoyable. I like the fact that there are factions, even in a tiny dungeon. I like the way in which it is another connection into another neighbourhood of Zion, and it's very restricted in scale, and that's about everything that I think you could reasonably say about it. The first dungeon we got was the ruins of the Inquisitor's Theatre in issue 1. This was a Kickstarter thing, by the way, the pamphlets. So yeah, through the Inquisitor's Theatre, the Inquisitors are the hand of justice, as it says here. They revel in elaborate punishment, reserving their dreaded puppets for the most heinous offences. You're like, oh man, you know this is going to be screwed up when there's evil puppets. Justice, they say, must be seen as well as done, and Inquisitors think of justice as a great and splendid show. These ruins were once a sacred theatre of their punishment. And there are factions here. This is... The way to think about each of these dungeons that have been published so far is they each, just like the 3 layers of Zion, each fulfill a particular function in the kind of meta-adventure concept, i.e. the dungeon environments, the city crawl, and the wilderness crawl. Each individual dungeon does definitely have theming in terms of what it's doing, not in terms of necessarily what's in there, though definitely that too, but in terms of its genre. So the Inquisitor's Theatre is the sort of open ruin, the place where it's not very focused in every way, and that's intentional. There are different things to do, different factions within it to play off against each other in a fairly meaningful way, that they have genuinely distinct aims. And I think that's something which differs from the other two, which we'll get to, as in the other two are basically a dual box and a siege. And the next one that's coming up, the Apartments of the Guildless, is Ben once described it to me as a Red Nails kind of environment, so with weird puppets in it again. So you can see there are different types of adventure that he's put out, different types of dungeon. And the theatre has these factions, the Guildless, who... When citizens commit shameful crimes, they're stripped of their masks, because everyone wears a mask, and they're given the wash, which blackens the mouth and destroys the vocal cords. They're expelled and they have to hang out. And so they're filled with fear and hatred. They are vulnerable to the hunters who come from above for sport. And here they have a village, and that's fun, isn't it? They flee always from mirrors. They feast on rotting flesh or offal in graves and catacombs, and are domesticated. This is their... Equus hounds, who are dogs with a horse skull, who are disgusting and are domesticated to serve as watchdogs. They will respond with force, but they will also parley. They don't speak, but you can sign. And so that's something where you immediately have a potentially friendly faction. Negotiation is useful. I think in the house rules for his new campaign, Ben said combat gets no XP, because though violence is an incredibly important tool in the box, it is not the prize. You use the tools to get stuff. And the other stuff is basically gold and exploration. The White Swine, look at this creepy dude. These are sentient or semi-sentient swine who serve their swine mother. The Weaver of Shadows, she is, or he is, it. She, he, it. It. Is a demon of the Archon Asmorain, spinner of the skeins of fate, whom the Inquisitors venerate under the aspect of Aphatis, the many-headed queen of puppets. Because of the strings, because of the webs. That's a wonderful connection, by the way, the idea that marionette strings are spider webs. I just realised that was the play there. And so the Weaver of Shadows wants veneration, and you can make friends with her. I mentioned that under the and I mentioned that underneath the Champions issue. I like the theatre a lot. I've run it. It was good. There are these different factions. There are ways of engaging with the supernatural aspects of it, in terms of both weird stuff in rooms and in terms of the Weaver and Shadows. There is a way down into Zion below, but you have to go via the Weaver and Shadows. You can go into the, I guess what you might think of as the southern section of the Zion Between area. I guess this will head towards via the Apartment of the Guildless into the wider second route through Zion Between, which I think has the Apartments of the Guildless and other places that Ben has described around. It's the Lunar Caverns, the Great Staircase, which are, yeah, interesting. The Great Staircase is also a connection to Zion Above. So you have this kind of nodal location where you can go south, north onto the Sewer River, or down. My party went south into the Apartments of the Guildless. And yeah, it's all very, very functional. It's you don't have to interact in a given way with things here, because it is this open, it is the open ruin kind of dungeon. It has that in that sense. The Monster Zoo is a closely related thing, isn't it? Where you just mess around with the things you want to mess around with. They're all floating pieces. They're really rich generally. They are weird, memorable. There's a couple certainly that do stick in the mind sometime after messing around with it and playing it. Partly there is just the theatre of punishments with the white swine and the queen sow, and the fact that underneath the stage there is this queen pig who you have to fight if you want to mess around with that area, and that gives you an entrance into the temple beyond with the holy puppets, the sweating maiden and the groomsman and the Aphatis marionette, all of which are just like, I think you can probably hear me saying that and think, wait, that all sounds horrifying. And it is. It's not as much the body horror that you get, a bit of it is, but as much as you get in the next dungeon I'm going to describe. But it's this sort of uncanny and unpleasant and freakish stuff. Puppets, evil puppets, they're uncanny and unpleasant. Gigantic bloated queen pig with sentient semi-humanoid pig people, not pig men but pig things, and just lots. The shrine to the pickled prince, which is the god that the Guildless are worshipping essentially. Lots of individual small things which are really memorable and interesting, but which don't force a particular play. There's no goal in it. There's no a couple of big artifacts they need to get. There are some. Another really nice one is apples in an underground orchard, which give knowledge of the laws of Zion. I think it's that there's a magical accident relating to magical scrolls and talking about the laws of Zion. So if you eat one of these, then you know the laws of Zion, and certainly the obscure, ridiculous system of justice in Zion, which is also detailed in I think Beneath the Moss Courts by Gus L, which I'll talk about. All of that is, you want to know how these things work, and it becomes relevant in other adventures. If you know that, then you'll be better at dealing with some of the stuff around Beneath the Moss Courts and some of the Zion Above stuff that happens there, and you'll be good at some of the stuff in the Catacombs of the Fleisch Guild. And so that is a nice thing where it's not just here's a magical item, but it's something that has direct use for other things that have been written and published. The Fleisch Guild. Here we have the chum spouts with jeweled insects eating chum. Zion is not a great place. That's something where obviously we are talking about some of those Lovecraftian cities, or a Conan style city. By the Lovecraftian ones I mean the kind of visions of other cities you get there. Certainly like Conan's cities, like in Stygia, for instance. It strikes me like a bit like Stygia. So here's those house rules for Slumberland I mentioned. The Catacombs of the Fleisch Guild. There are factions here. This is not a faction dungeon. So, though there are factions, these are less important. You're not really playing this off against each other. There is a limited amount of help you can get from the cursed guardians, who are kind of angry at everyone else, and they might give you hints whilst attacking you, because they kind of want you to win. They don't care, but they also don't want to be punished more. So the amount of interaction you're getting is much more indirect. The Fleisch Guilders, who might come down to clean stuff or to get stuff, the Flayed Heretics, who are the cursed guards, and the Mushroom Dead, who are just zombies, basically. And another demon, this of Vulgatis rather than Aphatis, who wants a magic item, and who will therefore negotiate with you to get it. who has, where's they? There's a, I think the picture's at the end. Let's, I'll find the picture of this guy. It's a pretty effective and horrendous picture. That guy, look at him. All those capillaries and veins and stuff, and kind of weird eyes and tentacles on the head made of blood vessels. This is a body horror dungeon. It's a jewel box dungeon, and it is a body horror dungeon. The master carvers are buried here. It's not a tiny jewel box. It's 29 rooms, but they are small rooms, it should be said. So when I say jewel box, I think that is actually a term that Ben's used, but it's not jewel box in the sense of, oh, there's 11 rooms and there's one puzzle or two puzzles. It's more that there are a lot of small rooms close to each other with weird interactive stuff, and this is an incredibly interactive dungeon, much more than the Theatre of the Inquisitor, the Inquisitor's Theatre, which is interactive but is more an open exploration dungeon. This is there's stuff to pull, and usually dangerous stuff to pull in every room. That he has a useful annotation next to the rooms that are trapped, and which I've tried to use a parallel thing in the stuff I write. That you can see here. We have, look at the fat spirits. That's pretty horrendous as a encounter. Chum spouts entry. Here we go. Tomb of the Child Prodigies trap. It warns you as the DM that you need to understand the room before the players go in. What I mean is, if there's a room that is empty or has something which is a puzzle or just has a straight encounter, usually as the DM, once you've read it once, you don't need to have memorised it thoroughly as you go back in. Whereas the trap rooms, if there's something on the door, or if there's a situation to do with different things in the room, you need to fairly tightly keep a hold on that for the trap to work. And so he does that quite well here, I think. That's just annotated trap, and you know the whole room has a trap in it. Here, it's that you can drink basins of water which either lose you XP but gain you heal, or gain you XP but will very quickly kill you unless you are healed, ironically. So there is a way in which you can basically, if you really want to, swap XP between characters by one person drinking one drinking the other. Then there are, normal treasure. Then there is inside the sarcophagi, there are two that are trapped, which mentions that they have poison gas, which is save or die. This is a lethal dungeon. If we think about this as you've gone to the theatre, you either went in at first or second level, and I think maybe second level isn't a bad starting point for most of this if you're using basic, or even if you're using AD&D. Certainly if you're using basic old school essentials. But yeah, if you go in at second or third into this dungeon, you can imagine a high body count from the fact it's meant to be a lethal dungeon. It's not a funhouse in the sense that it's not dumb, but it is a funhouse jewel box in the sense that it is small, tight, focused, and loads of stuff is really dangerous and ridiculous and weird. It's heavily themed. Everything here is disgusting. There is no sort of like, oh no, don't worry, this is a normal room. But then because it is so focused, the heavy theming works. It doesn't feel relentless. You are like, this is the weird, disgusting place with the chum spouts. So yeah, that's the Catacombs of the Fleisch Guild. There is, the Lurid Toads we will do next. The Dam of the Lurid Toads. So, Sanatorium. The Dam of the Lurid Toads. Basically, there is a spot on the river where these toads have diverted the river. You can see here they've diverted the river into a side chamber in front of a gate, which goes to the Temple of the Archons, I think. And they are toad people who want to eat. They're very funny and pleasant and interesting to talk to in a slightly ominous way, but they want to eat people, and they will charge a toll of flesh. Let's get the exact price. These are maybe, this is the thing I can imagine Chris Kutelik writing, and he did playtest some of these, so maybe that's not surprising. But this is maybe less insanely Zion than some of the other stuff, but it really is interesting and fun. They worship the dolorous pariah Archon Golomex, whom they assume to be of universal appeal. They like the guildless, because they also worship Golomex. They pity them. And what's the... so they say, give two of your passengers. Basically, want to eat two people. Should you wish to go above and beyond, 3 would be an exemplary gift. And if you don't pay, they will attack you. So you get an immediate thing that as soon as you realise these people, if you want to go through, are dangerous, and violent and pretty unpleasant, you're going to have to either work out selling your souls, as it were, by selling people's flesh, or you're going to have to fight. And this is obviously a major barrier that is intended to be much like the Weaver in Shadows is a real barrier to using the shaft down to Mount Drethi in the White Jungle. This is the major barrier to get down into the White Jungle via the Great Falls. And because the White Jungle is the higher level area, and that's kind of hinted in Elspeth's letter, where Elspeth describes, like, oh, these are these safe places in Zion above, these are these interesting places in Zion between, and yeah, these are these pretty dangerous places in Zion below. Maybe only go there when you're more experienced. The lurid toads are a way of marking off, like, are you ready to push through? Or at least, are you ready to go around kidnapping people to feed to them? And the strictly average party will bulk at doing that too often. I don't mean that every party will, or even... Basically, I think a slim majority of parties will probably avoid that, and so you're going to have to come up with a different solution for it. And yeah, this is... it's fun. It's not as detailed a dungeon as it's not meant to be. It has technically 5 locations, which is a good highlight of how small it is. It's at 3 pages of the digest size. But it gives enough to say this is how they live, and this is how you can get to draining it. This is how you can get access to the temple to the Archons, which is beyond their lair. And so, yeah, that is a small dungeon that is worthwhile having. The Temple of the Archons is a trans-dimensional location which links to different places. It links, I think, if you're on the blog, it links to the Weaver in Shadows and the True Temple of Volgatis, for instance. Finally, in terms of the dungeons, the Verdant Purveyor in Beneath the Moss Courts. This is described briefly in issue 3. The Lurid Toads was issue 3, part 2, by the way. It's described briefly in issue 3, part 1. It is a randomised minor location. It can be reached from above or below, and it is geared to be reached from above or below, and that's useful to know in that there's not an expectation that you have to go from below. Basically, these pirates are sewer pirates. They do go around the sewers on boats, but they are in an old sewer ship that is wrecked. It was a perfumer's ship that was wrecked on the sewer river, dragged into a side channel, and they've turned it into a base. And they are in cahoots with a fee inquisitor, like a civil lawyer, essentially, above, and they kind of do business with him. They deal with problems for him, and he helps them get stuff and helps cover up their activities and earns money from it. This is fully written up by Gus L of Dungeon of Signs and All Dead Generations, and I get Prisoner of the Hated Pretender is probably his best known adventure. He's also written a bunch of adventure add-ons to an On the Subsurface environment, which I recommended, I think, when I talked about those modules. Basically, this consists of 2 things. It consists of, might as well go to the table of contents, there is a cat. The Zine's Justice, so it consists of some notes on that, as I mentioned. It consists of a quick description of who people are, and then it consists of 2 locations. One is the above ground in Zion, the Moss Courts and the wider building that they are in, which is called... the suggestion if you're not using Beneath the Moss Courts is just these pirates are there. If you're using Beneath the Moss Courts, you gain the extra factional stuff to do with the above ground stuff. So the Moss Courts are a compact form of palace in the heart of Zion. Now a respectable 2-story set of offices and chambers, mostly for various public orators alongside import firms, commodore and tontine syndicates. And it gives a fairly limited overview of the whole thing, which I guess there's we can probably hop along to here. This is the map, and you can see here is the general description. You have rough descriptions of a few places, and then you have the detail here, including an inlay, which is the offices of the Osban, the Fee Inquisitor, who is a respected and loved, respected and admired and honest and notable Fee Inquisitor who has offices there. And that is if you want to see it as a micro dungeon associated below, because you might have to fight your way through it or sneak your way through it, certainly that it is. Then you get into the garden, and you can see this is the entrance via this grate down to the Moss Hole Boar, which is part of the wider complex of the underground section with the pirates. And yeah, this is again very usable map. This is something where when we're talking about pamphlets, and I know this was a standalone adventure, and I don't think this is a reasonable request by me, but I'm almost like, oh man, we're so close to getting a detailed location of Zion above. Instead, we get 3 office rooms. But this is the most detailed place we have for Zion above, and it shows the kind of, here's a map, here's something you could fill in, no reason you can't, and there we go. So that's the first section of this adventure that you go in. If you're going from above, there's Osban. You might be investigating him due to a link to Zion above. Maybe there's rumours leading you there due to kidnappings or disappearances, that's certainly an option kind of opened up from this, and you might need to sneak through or fight your way through and then go down, or you might be coming up from below and thinking, oh, this is the guy who is working with Freehand Hessek, the captain of the pirates. So that's useful. It is obviously pretty simple. It has some fun things, like it has tenants you can meet. That is a really useful random table because, one, you might go around talking to people, but two, these are people who, if you have ideas for your Zion Above campaign, you can quickly throw in these 8 NPCs with these jobs, and that opens up the world a bit for you with this insane, this rich, privatized bureaucracy. Classic Zionese gentleman in mask and with a wig. You've got the various rooms there, as you can see. And so it gives you a way through. That's enough said about that, probably. You then also, the other main thing that you have is the section of sewer below, which is where the pirates live. And there are possibilities of this being a semi-peaceful place. There are some ways it describes that you might be able to get through and get along with people. But the attached pamphlet, which is has a kind of a version of the map, it has a reminder of the rules for raising the alarm, and it has a note on running siege adventures, which is just game running advice. And it says it's not a simple dungeon crawl. Inquisitor's Theatre, much more the classic open dungeon crawl. Fleisch Guild, much more the funhouse or jewel box, like heavily interactive dungeon, if we're maybe removing that funhouse connotation. This one is the siege. So the equivalent here is not, let's find equivalents. Inquisitor's Theatre is something like, I guess, why is it so hard suddenly? But it's something like Sojkanth. That's not a bad example per se. Or to a lesser degree, maybe even the Caves of Chaos from B2. Fleisch Guild is, the nearest equivalent is something like White Plume Mountain, even though it's actually very far removed from that. But this kind of heavily themed, trap-heavy, interaction-heavy dungeon. And this is much more like G1 to 3 against the Giants. There are enemies in a base, and really you're presuming they're enemies because they see you as enemies. Maybe you could be recruits, but mostly you're victims. And so you're going to deal with them in some way or another for the money, for the access, for the escape. And so you have to think about the way, and Gus gives excellent advice on how to run that in this. This is, the sewer section is something where, if you infiltrate with a bit of care, if you spy it out, you can do it as a lower level party, a second or third level party. And he mentions that frontal assault, direct conflict with the Black Circle is unlikely to go well for a level 2-3 party, and this is intentional, he says. You can imagine a level 5 party, especially one dragging some henchmen behind it, could say, look, we've got a couple of big spells, we've brought along the magical arbalest, we're going to just bust them down, we're going to ruin their lives. This is a raid. But the lower level parties, and especially if you're on the Sewer River, you might be a level 3 party coming here quite realistically. You're going to have to be cleverer. So there are some things you can subvert within the environment. You can scout carefully, you can stealth around and assassinate some of the watchers and guards. There are a couple of guards who don't really care, and they'll let you go past if you're careful. There are some prisoners they will join you. And that's a classic thing. That's very much D2 Shrine of the Kuatoa is great for that, isn't it? You can just create an army of people coming to help you if you want. Which, when I ran it, was a great. I mean, we had to improvise some mass combat there, but like this battalion of, or like company of soldiers running through, that was good fun. And then there's one fairly senior member of the crew, the magic user, who is an opium dreamer, I think. She isn't that attached to this. She doesn't massively like how nuts everyone is. Like, the leaders are pretty unpleasant. And the NPCs in this are really well detailed. I enjoyed these major NPCs. In terms of visualising characters, Gus has done really well here. So, for instance, let's get 1 or 2 examples up of that. There is Doubtful Mercy and the Lamprey are I think more or less the second in commands, are they? And Doubtful Mercy is a 7-foot tall woman with extraordinary musculature who is deadly, obsessed with swordsmanship. You might be able to get past her by offering her a duel to first blood. The winner leaves the area, but she then will probably try to cheat her way through using her semi-magical technique, her almost kung fu sword technique, the Dolorous Stroke. The Lamprey, on the other hand, is just a sociopath with a magical weapon, and he's very polite. Hessek, their leader, likes chopping people's hands off, and the magic user's not convinced. Classic interaction there. Quite hard to finesse. How do you make it happen? You're sneaking through the ship, and you got to meet her in the right situation and make friends with this spider mage without trying to kill her or without running away from her. But that's really nice. But eventually, push comes to shove, you're having to cut people's throats, and when you pick the right moment, or if you're forced to, just fight some people. And yeah, it's good. And there are some rules about how they might improve security, how they'll react to incursions. But yeah, I do with the raising the alarm and how they work out raising the alarm. But so you're going to probably attack more than once if you're doing it that way. The one-off siege, they take 6 level 5 characters, 4 henchmen, magical arbalest, and a bunch of spells. Yeah, you're going to bust through the gate that way. But if you're a level 3 party with like one guy, with one hireling with a spear, you're going to be sneaking through. You're going to be killing a few guards. You're going to be rescuing slaves. You're going to be scoping out weaknesses. The actual map, and let's get past the map, perhaps. That is the ship itself. You can see here there is a general. Here's a bit of the sewer. Here are some locations, including a stink crane matriarch. Here's the moss hole boar, which has a cursed human living there who is allied with Hessek, who will therefore alarm the pirates. And here is the pirate section. And then inside the pirate section, there is. So you can see, by the way, from the lettering, you have sewer. And then the red channel, which is everything over to here, and then you have the ship itself, which is keyed under a separate map. And so yeah, there is, by the way, that is a pirate settlement there. It's just not a pirate settlement you get to hang out in, I'm afraid. And the pirates are terrible, and you're kind of given the scope for not feeling bad about offing the pirates and their floozies. So yeah, it's good. I enjoyed it a lot. There's lots of interactive elements. It gives a lot of variety. If we think about the sewer, river, point crawl again, and if we add in the honeybee, you've got 5 very different dungeons, including an infiltration section above ground in a normal building. That mean that when you are in Zion Between, you're not going to end up doing the same thing twice, and which they're not openly leveled really on the whole. There are occasional hints. But they are all kind of accessible to, say, a level 2 or 3 party. The level 1 party might really want to. The Inquisitor's Theatre is an obvious place for them. And let's think, how does the honeybee look for a level 1 party? Because, of course, that may be another option for dumping them to start. Can I even find it again? Have I lost it forever in this pile in my lap? Yeah, here we go. What's the hit dice on some of these monsters? There are rumours, by the way, on the honeybee one, or at least reasons you might want to go there, and some of the options about what you could do there. And the honey ghouls, I think, given that where do we have details for the honey ghouls, actually? I think this still kind of feels, yeah, here we go. Honey ghouls are HD2, and Apian Ogre is HD4, the Gardener is HD3. You're probably talking about, again, this being maybe a level 1 to 2, so maybe the Inquisitor's Theatre or the Knowing Bee Sweet Forge are places to send your players first, if you're trying to just give them a place to enter the world rather than multiple rumours. So yeah, that's the Verdant Purveyor. I think Gus has done a great job with the standalone adventure. It feels to me, having read them all, I'm like, this is integral to my vision of it. I don't want the simpler version, I want this detailed version. With the above ground section, with all the options, with all the factional possibilities within. but also with the genre distinction of it being a base attack, a siege adventure. That's the sort of summary of the main material. There's maybe two more points I'm going to address because I think they'll be interesting. One is that there are a variety of Zine above city locales mentioned, so you get much more detail in the officially published material on Zine above than you do on Zine below. That's partly because Zine below is higher level. Though I say that, Ben's first campaign, his players didn't go to Zine above after, I think, 2 years or something. They hadn't got there yet. They'd had a way up for 20 sessions and they hadn't gone there because they had particular objectives. They had gone below. So it's not a one way or the other kind of system. But yeah, there are plenty of Zine above city locales detailed to lesser or greater degrees in these books. So on a minor level, you have the small abattoir of the Fleisch Guild is accessible via their catacombs. The moss courts, of course, are accessible via the red channel of the verdant purveyor. The gardens and the honeybee are part of Gutter, that location, that neighbourhood. And there are a couple of others kind of indifferently mentioned. The Grand Staircase, which is not officially a published location, it's mentioned elsewhere, leads up to a current inquisitorial theatre. So that is another option. The most detailed by far are... Have I exited Elspeth's letter? I think I have. Elspeth's letter is the place with the most detailed above Zine above locations. There are 3 neighbourhoods mentioned, 3 things you can go to, more or less dangerous, safe houses, etc. And that's something where I don't think Ben has put those in accidentally. He's put them in as teasers for the player, especially if there's a possibility of getting back the memories. And he's given them there as something for the DM to plan and plot. Yeah, I think Zine above... And he has, I should say, this is one thing, he has put up city crawl rules on the blog. They're old, they're playtest, caveat emptor. I'm sure he'll rework them. This is one of the things about zines, isn't it, is that if we don't get there till issue 6 or something, that's so upsetting. We're going to have to wait so long. But if you're willing to put the work in Zine above, you begin to see from the published material and with a bit of help from the blog how you could run this city-state of the Invincible Overlord style, sprawling, decayed city, wonderful stuff, terrible stuff, sacrifices, bizarre judicial system. Zine below is less detailed, particularly in the published material. You get Mount Drethy mentioned. You get the hanging pagodas of the hanging pagodas of the merchants, pagodas of the hanging merchants. They are detailed on the blog if you want them. There is also on the blog the some various test rules for hex crawling in the White Jungle, because it's a vertical hex crawl. You can go horizontally or you can go vertically, which I have suggested elsewhere on my blog. Might be useful for a rescue of of Spelljammer if you want to have a Spelljammer campaign using a sort of a vertical hex crawl to give you options about going through semi 3D space. Yeah, a point crawl would also work for that, of course. Finally, just mentioning things that Ben is looking to do. The Apartments of the Guildless, he mentions at the end of issue 3, he says, the Apartments of the Guildless, this is the next issue, a dynamic point crawl through abandoned chambers, ruined temples, arcades and sunken courtyards where the outcasts of Zion are hunted by stuttering puppet automata. Visit the convent of the crawling nuns, hear haunting flutes amidst trembling fungal woods, and much more. And he's done that with each issue. There is in next issue each time. The Apartments of the Guildless, I don't know loads about, but that certainly whets my appetite. And Ben has mentioned it as having that Red Nails feel as well. There's the Lunar Caverns. There's the Grand Staircase. There will be, I guess, White Jungle hex crawling. And the final thing is this is off Ben's blog. I think this is from Ultan's Door 2 years in. I think it's that article. And this was the map of what his players had got to. And you can see some of the Sewer River locations. You've got the infestation of lurid toads, the ruins of the Inquisitors Guild with Ultan's Door, catacombs of the Fleisch Guild. There's the Great Falls. And you can see mentioned they'd got access to the Temple of the Archons. They'd gone to the true Temple of Volgatis. They had gone down the chasm to Mount Drethy. They'd gone via the Great Falls to the Hanging Merchants. they'd seen the Apartments of the Guiltless and the Lunar Caverns, and then there's obviously other potential locations off. I guess the Grand Staircase would be one of them, as well as What Is Beyond the Churning Gate, which I think I have seen variously mentioned as a prison for the temporal maenads in this, and as a, on the blog mentioned as, I think the Horoscopes Guild has something behind it, and I don't know if that's the same thing. I should say it sounds like it might be, but yeah, you can see that this is something which has had a lot of play go into it and thought going into it. The sheer scope of it is really exciting. It's something where in a dream world, we would be able to get Ben to work, not just kind of work full time in this, do whatever else he's doing, whatever his current time is, we'd triple it. He'd just be able to write and playtest it, because there are a few OSR settings which demand expansion. Dolmenwood is one, and very exciting that is so close to completion, of course. Follow the Patreon if you're interested in knowing where we're at now with that, or where Gavin is at now with that. But here, the fact that you've got just such a psychedelic and technicolor environment, such a vivid place with all these different options and genres and themes, and the fact that when you realise how Ben sees it and plays it, it's not just a here's weird stuff, let's do some disgusting weird adventures, but it is a place of epic scope and of an ability to really achieve things for players who survive, for characters who survive, to really go into legend. And we haven't even got that much, we've got hit some of his ideas about Zine above, but the fact that you have this kind of decaying city cursed by a weird ancient monarchical system with this hidden king who's cursing the city or whatever, from memory that's what it is. You've got these cats who are undertaking a terror campaign way beyond any sort of moral compass to avenge themselves on their oppressors. And you have just normal people who are trying to get on with life in the midst of it, which is a really lovely, the classic contrast of the baroque and disgusting and the grand scale. Judge Dredd is great at that. It's an exciting setting. That the setting so far is one that I think with issue 3, with the sewer river, and with particularly with if you have the Knowing Bee and Beneath the Moss Courts as extra adventures, I think there's enough there to occupy your players for realistically a year or more, isn't there? Years of play, depending on your rapidity of play. So I highly recommend it if you can cope with organisational issues, if you like the theming, if you can cope with body horror and with intense, bizarre imagery, if that's your jam. And I should say, probably this is something where it will be too rich for some people. Not just in terms of that's disgusting, but in terms of, like, it really is leaning into one side of the fantasy trope, isn't it? It's not kind of giving you it's not giving you high vanilla. Someone like Gabor Lux, amazing at giving you high vanilla. And even something like Dolmenwood, which is not high vanilla, but blends high vanilla through into this very weird fairyland. But the fairyland is one which kind of the touchstones are there. Zion is much beyond that. It is something where nothing is going to be familiar to players, and including particularly and most importantly the worldview of the world they're entering into. So yeah, if you have played or run this, I'd love to hear what you think, yeah, I guess particularly if you've run this, what you've added to it and how you've expanded this, because as I'm thinking about running another campaign in this at some point, so yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So yeah, tell me in the comments. Till next time.